Hello, and welcome to another presentation of the Academic Writing Program at the University of Maryland. I'm Linda McCree, Director of Academic Writing, and in this presentation I'll talk about peer review, or peer workshop, and its role not only in English 101, but in academic writing more broadly. Peer review is an integral part of English 101 because the Academic Writing Program believes peer review is an important part of academic writing. Scholars seek feedback from peers at all stages of writing, from the development of ideas all the way through the publication in academic journals. In fact, one way that you'll hear scholarly publications referred to is as peer-reviewed journals, because papers are only accepted for publication in those journals after peers, other scholars in that field, have read the work and agree that the inquiry, the argument, and the writing have merit. Wanting feedback from others as we develop, articulate, and polish the presentation of our ideas is part of the academic mindset. Participation in peer review also reminds us of the ways that rhetoric is a social act. By that I mean it reminds us that we make and participate in arguments as a communicative act in the social realm. Though we may often feel as if we are all alone when we write, we expect our words to be read by others, and we're influenced by our culture and the context in which we write. So seeking advice from peers reflects this recognition that rhetoric and writing are social acts. In English 101, you're developing your talents as both a critical reader and a critical writer. That's another reason we do peer editing. As a peer editor reading a classmate's paper, you hone your own reading skills, as well as learning to offer your classmate valuable feedback from a reader's perspective. Perhaps most of you participated in peer editing in your earlier years in school, and perhaps you didn't always find it a valuable experience. Well, being a reader and an editor takes a lot of practice, and it works best if you're really willing to engage with the process and engage with what you're reading. So how might you approach your job as a peer editor? First of all, you should read and respond as a reader. That's what will benefit your classmates most. As you have no doubt experienced, when you write something, it's often challenging to develop a critical distance from the writing so that you can really tell whether it's clear and says what you want it to say. After all, what you want to say is in your head. Reading our own work, it's hard to know how effectively we've communicated what's in our head. So as a reader, as a peer editor and as a reader, you can really offer that perspective, and you're offering the reader a lot. As a peer reviewer, it's good to try and remain positive in the comments that you offer. We all want to hear what we've done well, and we accept suggestions and criticism more readily from people when we believe that they are really concerned. Also, as a critical reader, remaining positive as you read is part of playing the believing game as an approach to an argument. As a peer reviewer, you should ask questions. Being positive doesn't mean you can't be critical. Ask questions of the text and the author. If you don't understand something, if a phrase isn't clear, if you're not sure about a connection, ask about it. If you have questions as a reader, that's an opportunity for the writer to understand how they can communicate more effectively. You should also offer detailed comments. Feedback that is too general isn't very helpful. If you just say, I don't get this, or this is fine, you haven't really offered the writer sufficient feedback, and you haven't effectively come to terms with the text that you're reading. As a peer reviewer, you should also be trying to attend to global concerns. While you may want to comment on the clarity of particular sentences, in general, avoid being a copy editor, only commenting on misplaced commas or misspelled words, in favor of responding to issues that shape the whole paper, the thesis, its development, the organization, the content, how it responds to the assignment. Again, you want to respond as a reader, engaging the text, not as a word processor, checking the spelling and grammar. And along those lines, too, I want to underscore that you want to engage with the ideas of the paper. Your job as a peer reviewer isn't just to report what's not working, but to engage the text and its ideas. Your feedback will be most useful if you're enthusiastic and engaged with the text. In English 101, we'll be practicing peer editing so that it's another skill that you hone and develop. And the rest of this presentation will be a close look at how we might go ahead and do the peer editing on a classmate's paper. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at a sample student paper, one that you have in your documents, and we're going to talk about how we might go forward with the peer editing. All right, so we're going to start with this sample essay, The Future, Green Economics, and this is a sample that you have in your documents. Hopefully you've read it through. As a peer editor, you'd want to read it through all the way once to get a general sense of it before you start offering comments. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to assume that you've done that, and I'm going to go ahead and start making comments. I'm going to do it with the comment feature in Word just so that you can see them. And so that you can see them a little better, I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger so that you can read the comments that I'm making. All right, so in the opening sentence, I'm going to talk about the way that the opening sentence actually helps the reader figure out what's going on. So I'm going to say that the "in this speech" phrase is just a little bit confusing. And I'm going to say that the author should remember to introduce the speech before saying this speech or in this speech. And then I'm wondering too, at the end of this sentence here, the author says that Daly is focusing on the avoided question. And I'm not quite sure what that means. So I'm going to highlight that too. And I'm going to make a comment. So I'm going to make this comment here that this phrase, the avoided question, I'm not really sure why the author's called this the avoided question. I don't really get that sense from Daly that this is the question that he's avoiding. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next part. Here's the next part. He defines economic growth as a physical change to our economy, as well as a growth that yields a net benefit. Okay. Daly recognizes that these two definitions cannot coexist, giving us a rising stasis correlation between cost and benefits. All right, I think this phrase, rising stasis correlation, is not particularly clear. I'm going to make a note of that. Okay, so I pointed out that I'm not quite sure what this phrase means. One of the problems that I'm seeing overall in this essay as a reader is that there's ideas don't tie together particularly effectively. And I'm going to point that out actually in these two sentences. Whoops. So I'm going to add a comment here. So I've pointed out here that these two sentences, that I think it might work better if they're combined. They seem to be a little bit redundant, that they're not particularly clear, and they might be clearer if they were combined. The second part seems a little clearer than the first. All right, so moving on. Remember, I want to be a careful reader and really give the author feedback that helps them develop the paper more. So the author writes, gross domestic product, an empirical measure of growth, produces bads as a byproduct of consuming goods, but does not fiscally account for them. We ignore these byproducts by including the value of pollution cleanup, but do not subtract the cost of pollution itself. Daly speaks of the much-needed green economy and commends the plant's ability to capture abundant solar energy while recycling the products for use. Plants did not become dependent on a scarce energy source such as fossil fuels. Rather, they utilized the almost indispensable sun. So remember, as a reader, we're supposed to really comment on the development and pushing the author to really help them be sure that they've communicated effectively. So I'm going to make a comment here for these sentences. So I've made this comment that all the ideas are clear in each sentence. Each sentence is clearly constructed, but they don't quite go together. And as a reader, it's not really clear to me how they develop or how they connect to one another to make a good summary. And then I have it's just the very ending here. And it seems to me that this very end, this economy consists of utilizing solar energy, recycled materials, and alternative ways of generating energy to create a more sustainable society for generations to come. That seems like a little bit of an incomplete way to explain Daly's conclusions. So I'm going to make one more comment here. So I've commented here that this conclusion doesn't really seem to reflect exactly Daly's ideas about how a green economy would develop. All right, so I've read through the whole thing. And I've made comments on particular parts, and then I want to offer one final end comment. And what I want to say overall, I've kind of said in pieces already, and I want to again stress what is working in the draft, and I also want to suggest as a reader how from my perspective as a reader, how the author can go forward with a revision, what kinds of things they need to work on. So. Okay, so I've written a closing comment. Obviously in peer review, I would also be able to say this to the reader, but in peer review, you're going to be doing some of them online, some of them in writing, and you're always going to need to have something in writing because, of course, you're going to submit your peer reviews to your instructor so that your instructor can evaluate you as a peer reviewer too. So you want to be able to phrase what you want to be able to articulate what you're saying in writing, not just in speech. So I've written to my classmate that in each sentence here, the ideas are good and pretty clear, but I think there needs to be more connection between sentences to help the summary make more sense. I think that they explain that they need to explain Daly's main aim or project, and then connect the ways that the important points create or support that project. I think the author could also talk more about his methods, the way that he uses definitions, explanations, and metaphors. And I think that using paragraphs in the summary would help make ideas clearer. The idea that this is all one big paragraph, I think, detracts from the way it's organized and from how it can clearly deliver information to the reader. So I think that's a good example of the kinds of comments that you would put on a peer editing, that you would give to your peer in a peer editing workshop. Remembering that you've talked about how some, not about any kind of typos or anything, but how things on the specific level relate to the global level. You've given positive feedback. So you've said what's working. Each sentence seems to make pretty good sense. You've pointed out phrases where they don't work particularly well, and you've given some overall suggestions for revision. So when you have peer editing, this is a kind of model for what you should be doing as well. So thanks, and good luck with your own peer editing.